I just said, is it fair that I should be taken off the deal?
Oof.
This person did something that people saw enough that you're, so concerned. Maybe he should be taken off the deal.
Welcome to API Futures, a podcast by Ascend where we empower global leaders of tomorrow. Here's our guest host for this episode.
Welcome to API Futures. I'm Jerry Wan, CEO of Just Like Media, and today I'm delighted to host Marissa McGowan, Chief Sustainability Officer of L'Oreal. Welcome, Marissa.
Thank you so much for having me.
This is such an exciting time for us here in the middle of 2024 to talk about what it means to be us and the allyship that we can both display but also experience in just so many different facets. And delighted to be hosting this conversation with you. Thanks to our friends at Ascend, who are always advocating for our advancement and just both in the corporate world and outside. Tell us a little bit about yourself, Marissa.
Oh, Jerry, how much time do you have? Well, so my story begins in New York. My parents, my father's Italian, my mother's Hawaiian Japanese. They met on a plane. People often ask, well, how did they even find each other? They met on a plane. My mother was a flight attendant. I grew up in New York between Manhattan and just north of Manhattan. And luckily for us, because my mom worked for the airlines, we spent a lot of time in Hawaii where her family is all from, our family, but on her side. I say my story starts on a school trip I think I was 11 years old, to the United Nations. And we went as a school trip into New York, and I walked in there and I had one of those strange experiences that you remember forever. The idea of countries coming together to work on things that were bigger than any one country. It's probably my first understanding that the U.S. couldn't just do things, that you had to work together. And it was maybe one of my first introductions to issues that crossed what we think of as borders. I don't know how that all computed in an 11-year-old brain, but it kind of took off from there. So happy to continue or...
Sure. No, that's wonderful. So 11, you were at the United Nations and you had an epiphany. And here you are today, leading one of the largest retail in brands in beauty on the sustainability front. What did you want to be? What did 11-year-old Marissa want to be? And then take us through sort of how you ended up doing this particular role.
So interestingly, I went to the same pediatrician until I was 18 and she kicked me out of her office. I loved her. Thank you, Dr. Bursfeld. She asked us every year, what do you want to be when you grow up? And apparently every year, she told me this when I was finally kicked out of the office, that I said lawyer. And I think I said that because my father was very keen for me to be a lawyer. For both my parents, they were the first to go to college, and education was super important to my grandparents and to my parents. And I think for them, the idea of having a law degree was something that could not be taken from me. It was something that even if I didn't want to practice, I would continue to do. I remember one year, I think I was in maybe 10th grade, and I came home and said, I think I want to work for Greenpeace. And my father said, that's fantastic. You could be the legal liaison between Greenpeace and insurance companies because they do a lot of, activist moves. He said, no, I want to chain myself to the boats. And he said, no, you could be the lawyer. So there were 6 of us. 3 of us took that path. 3 didn't. We succumbed to the pressure, but I'm so grateful for that.
You had 5 siblings?
Yes.
Wow.
Yes.
Wow. I have 1, and then one's enough to deal with. And we have 2 kids, and that's a lot.
We are big and messy, and my husband's one of 5. So we have 28 nieces and nephews.
Wow.
I think like the allyship we see in corporate America and throughout our careers, being an aunt and uncle is an underrated role.
Sure.
Really important one.
Where are you in the 6?
So I'm number 5 of 6. And I say that I learned a lot of my stakeholder engagement tactics in my house because as number 5, no one's waking up and saying, I really want to know what number 5 wants to do today, right? So you need to be able to go with the flow and be led. But I think if you want something to happen, you also need to know how to advocate and get everyone behind you to turn the big ship that is a big family in your direction.
How long did you enjoy being the baby of the family before you are not?
2 years.
2 years?
So I don't even remember it. No.
Okay.
Yeah.
Wonderful. So you went on to college and then to law school and do this work, but Tell me about your first job, and maybe not the one that was the legal job, but what other things did you explore in your pursuit of being an activist, and trying to also balance your true passions of wanting to make direct impact, but also understanding that to make great impact on a large scale, that you had to go to certain places and exist in places like law school and law firms and other places like that.
So I will say my first real job was at a law firm, and I was an associate. But I think there's an impression sometimes that it's a one-size-fits-all sort of experience. And for me, I did a rotation in litigation, realized very quickly that that was probably not my calling. Did another rotation in international project finance, which was really billed to me at the time as using cross-border solutions and financing mechanisms to build infrastructure that brings peace, right? So we put a nice little spin on it. It's really corporate finance. But I, for various reasons, which we may get into in this podcast, decided to try one more rotation, and I ended up in mergers and acquisitions. And I think to your point, I loved school until probably my first year of law school. Growing up, I loved school. I loved college. I studied international relations in 2 languages. So I'd go from these maybe sometimes advanced classes talking about geopolitics, and then we'd sing songs in Italian, and it was just fun. And I really enjoyed it. I got to law school and thought I took a wrong turn. It was so intense. People were really competitive, and the subject matter was hard for me. And I think I realized I had to put that year or 2 in, the first 2 years being the hardest. It was a stepping stone. It was, a means to an ends. And I overstudied and ended up getting through there and getting into the firm I wanted to go to. Same thing with those early firm days. They were not, it's not I slipped into the right role right away. I had to explore and meet people and try things, and then find my rhythm and my people. So yes, it was a legal job, but it took me a little while to find my right sort of spot in the firm. And then 2 years in, I ended up going abroad with them on a pilot program.
So when we see Marissa's resume on paper or read a bio, we don't get that context, right? Because it just says law school, then law firm, and all these things. Tell us a story or two about that decision-making process for you to stick with it. Because I think there's a lot of conversation, particularly, parents with more job choice and more availability for our children. And, yes, while we prioritize and get to talk about things like mental health and happiness and different pursuits, there is still this, perhaps more of a cultural tone as well for the cultures that we come from, of tenacity, of sacrifice, of sticking through it. And I don't think I am alone in thinking through that, both for myself and for my children, in what's the right balance. So how did you navigate those 2 very objectively difficult and challenging circumstances, whether it's 3 years of law school or the first 2 years at a big firm? I'm sure you wanted to quit. What got you through, and what advice would you have for other folks sort of toggling those 2 difficult decisions?
I hope I do this question justice, because it's a great question. I think it's a combination of, like you said, there was a can-do attitude, and I definitely got my work ethic from my mother and my grandmother. They were some of the hardest workers still. My mother's 80 years old, still working. She has said she's going to retire for the last 3 years. She promises next year. So, but I love that she stays active and engaged, and she was a huge role model for me. I think some people grew up with some parents who worked, some parents who didn't work. I grew up with 2 parents who worked. And I loved seeing her get ready in the morning, and she was going to New York City, and it was really inspirational for me. At the same time, she wasn't at my sporting events or my concerts, and that's the trade-off, right? She is an incredible mother, but those things weren't necessarily there. So I definitely think I got my work ethic from her. I didn't really think it was a choice to continue. And I also have always tried to find joy and humor and friendship in the things I do. So I found my group at law school pretty quickly. It was not a big group, but we found each other and we stuck together and we kept each other sane, doing things like exercising together, as well as studying together. and creating some forums just to talk and hang out and enjoy each other's company. Same thing at the law firm. I very quickly found my crew, and we did same thing. Actually, we did this exercise class together that we would schedule at the time of day. It was usually 9 a.m. We were all in corporate, and usually we didn't hear from the bankers until 10. So you had this little window, and we would go and do this exercise class together. And it was like a therapy session, but we also, were doing something for ourselves, and somehow we fit it in an otherwise kind of crazy time. But yes, I would say a combination of role modeling from my family, support systems through friends, definitely a lot of conversations with my family. I'm very open about what I'm going through and try to take advice and counsel from the people I trust and love.
So also a very lawyer answer. So when we talk about the journey that you've had, through school, being in a family of 6, all the things that we could argue objectively are challenging, there are additional, and then not better or worse, but different challenges that come from who we are and who you are as you navigate these spaces. As a woman, as a person of color, as a mixed race Asian American, there are definite things that I don't even know. I have a wife, I have a mother, I have a daughter, but that is, I'm limited in my understanding of what that lived experience is like. Were there some challenges that you felt that were unique to you, and how did you navigate either through it or around those?
Definitely. And I would say I had a bit of an identity crisis because I had a very loving Italian father who told me that I could, jump to the moon and come back before dinner. And I had a very humble Japanese mother who really did not, I have so much respect. She never really talked about people badly. She was very modest and really saw value in modesty. So I think advocating for myself has always been a challenge. And if you want, I can go to some interesting examples that are a little raw and real, but I'm happy to go
Please,
there.
yeah, pick one, yeah.
So I was probably 3 years into my legal career. I had moved to London with my law firm and was working on a deal in Italy. It was the deal that would end up setting me on basically my career course. But at the time, there was another lawyer from a different firm who made inappropriate gestures, innuendos, comments. Actually, it was shocking, but one of the people in my firm saw him do something, and he came up to me and said, this is unacceptable. He said, let's just see how it goes. And he actually called my senior associate. So there were 3 of us on the deal. So he was a junior, then me, a senior associate, and a partner. I get a call from my partner, who's back in New York, can barely breathe. He is like, I am getting you out of there right now. What do you need? How quickly can I get you out of there? We need to get you out of there. I am so sorry this happened. And I said, well, wait, hold on a second. Thank you, first of all. I was really grateful to my colleague for not listening to me, for going ahead and, escalating it. I think that took a lot of bravery as a very junior associate on a foreign deal, coming over and being asked by his senior, please don't say anything. So I think that was bravery. Then I get the call from my partner saying, what do you need? How do I get you out of there as quickly as possible? What I loved even more was I don't know where it came from. It had to be some combination of my father and my mother or whatever was growing inside me. I just said, is it fair that I should be taken off the deal? Oof. This person did something that people saw enough that you're, so concerned. Maybe he should be taken off the deal. And I think back to that time because I have always had a hard time advocating for myself. And in that moment, I thought, what was it about that moment where I felt comfortable saying that? I think it's, an environment with people who I knew supported me, and they were all men in that team of people. It was a value of sort of justice, which has defined my career. And I think so much of my guiding principles, it's fighting for injustice, against injustice, and trying to see and live my life and have my career focused on being just and fair and reasonable. But yes, that ended up, he said, okay, but I'm going to send the senior associate over. I hope you're okay with that. I said, absolutely. And that was the company. It was after that deal that I got asked to go in-house. It set me on a 14-year career in fashion, which then led to my career in beauty. So I don't know. I've never told that story before.
No, Marissa, I think that's a beautiful story, because I think oftentimes when we approach these things, I've got 2 little children at home. And so when we think about sort of, schoolyard conflicts or things like that, we always, and again, in the best of intent to keep safe, right? Or to provide safety or to avoid future conflict, we say, well, why don't you not hang out with that kid? Or, or maybe a teacher might suggest, like, why don't you take a different door? Or, just stay out of the kid's way. Mm-hmm. And you're right. It's not right. Why should the bully or the perpetrator not be held accountable to the same terms? And yes, there are different dynamics of gender and race and other identities that come into sometimes who is asked to take a step back. And so I am so glad you did that. and it has set you on this wonderful course that, led you to our conversation today and the work that you're doing at L'Oreal, which really is a lot about empowerment. It is a beauty company, but what does beauty actually mean? It leads to confidence, and it leads to people, particularly women in that world, and men, feeling better about themselves and then coming out as best self. Share with us what sort of programs you are most proud of, and things that you believe that those programs will empower all of us to do.
So first of all, I really appreciate the way you talked about beauty, because I think there's a very quick definition or esoteric definition of what it means at L'Oreal. And I said this once when I was speaking with Ascend, that I am so lucky to work every day for a company that is searching for ways for beauty for each and beauty for all. So it's being inclusive, but it's also understanding that every individual has a unique definition of beauty, how they define that, how that comes through. And I think what's exciting now is also seeing the link to wellness. So we have a number of amazing makeup brands and hair care brands, but we also have incredible dermatological beauty brands and brands that are bringing more comfort and hopefully joy to people, for example, with cancer. My sister-in-law unfortunately lost her battle to cancer, but some of her greatest joy in the last 6 months was our La Roche-Posay collection and using all the lotions and creams that have been tested on cancer patients and patients with pretty common diseases that go through pretty regular treatments. So I think it is so fun for me to see the expression of beauty through a lot of my male colleagues now, playing with makeup, experimenting with nail color, and finding self-expression through our different products. And it's also really, I think, rewarding to see some of our products helping people with issues like acne, eczema, treatments. And to your point, empowerment for us comes through our products, but it also comes through our programs. As one of the biggest beauty companies, the way we structure our programming is through transforming ourselves. So what are we doing for our internal workforce for empowerment? And that's everything from our ERGs to our leadership and development programs. There's then, how are we working with our communities? We really believe, I think most big companies do, that we have both a responsibility and a huge opportunity if we activate our networks. For us, there's not that much we can do without working with our retailers.
Sure.
So if we don't work with our retailers, we can't necessarily reach certain consumers and certain communities. So through the power of partnerships, through a mindset of amplification, we work on a lot of community programs. And then we have funds. So we work on a women's empowerment fund, 50 million euros for women around the world, and inclusive sourcing policies. So actually, we just expanded our latest cohort of people in the United States that we've expanded inclusive sourcing to is women in transportation. So I don't know if that answers your question.
That's wonderful.
It's a lot of different ways of looking at how we can add value through the conversation.
And I really appreciate the context, because I think for the average consumer, average person, they don't understand the complexity through which a lot of things work behind the scenes, right? They go to a store, they see a brand, and they associate it with just that transaction or that product or even that brand overall. But oftentimes you don't think about sort of the work that goes behind the scenes to think about that. And as you've touched on, the term beauty has evolved, and I for one think it's a positive way. And I think men, folks of different identities, are feeling more empowered and given the permission to be themselves in all the different definitions and aspects, and just the way that we think about skincare, for example. Whether it's independent brands or traditional brands, they're weaving through and breaking through barriers of what a lotion is, and there are, videos on the internet galore of different skincare routines and all the wonderful products that people want to try. And trust me, if my wife is listening to this, she'll say, hey, you need to do this, this, and this. And are you taking care of your skin on the road and all that, And I think it's good. I think it's good because ultimately it allows folks to be themselves, right? And we are asking people to show up in workspaces, in the community, with their families. And the core of that is waking up and making sure that you feel confident enough, as you did back in your career, to stand up for yourself. Because at least the way that I feel is really influenced by the way that I look, the way that I dress. And again, I think we're going through an interesting, transition in 2024 of what is professional wear? How do you show up at work? What is work, right? Work from home, work from not. And so looking towards the future, both in your role at L'Oreal and you, Marissa, as just a professional and a leader in our community and in the corporate world, what excites you about where we've been and where we are going?
I think being with Ascend and being with this group of leaders really excites me. Where we've been, I think, in talking to leaders throughout the API community, I realize that so much of our strength and what makes us the leaders we are came from our shared experiences and our lived experiences. And that makes me really proud. For me, being a sustainability professional 10 years ago, there was a very different conversation. So seeing how mainstreamed it is, as someone who's in the beauty industry, seeing advertisements that I grew up with versus advertisements today, that really excites me. And a real understanding that our products and our advertising need to reflect the communities we serve.
Sure.
And those communities that we serve are increasingly diverse, and diversity in terms of age, gender, ethnicity, you name it. And the closer we can get to servicing those communities, the better we are. And that is the same thing for employment. So as messy as some of the languages out there now, I say to people who ask me about, all the noise around sustainability, I say, great. People are talking about it. It's mainstreamed. We're in the conversation. And you've got incredible leaders that are pushing agendas. Bill Gates yesterday coming out with, a nuclear energy startup. Okay, fantastic. I think the same thing on the advertising side, like what we're seeing today. But most of all, what inspires me for the future, and this is so cheesy, but whenever I get upset, I talk to one of my nieces and nephews, and they just have such a different perspective. The things that are controversial to us are not controversial to them. They do not, at least in my experience, they don't see climate as political. They don't see equality as political. They don't see justice as political. And so when I get really down, I go out with them and I feel a little bit better.
That's exciting. And I agree with all of it. And I can't wait to help create the world that my kids will grow up and all of our collective children and our future generation will grow up in. There's a program that you were a part of, or L'Oreal was a part of, called the Worth It Resume, where we are encouraging folks to reframe the things that we were initially thought to be negative experiences or setbacks. I'm a strong proponent of reframing because I believe we are who we are because of these challenges and because of our unique differences. But whenever one of us succeeds, there's this narrative in media of, despite the challenges, so-and-so made it. And we hear this a lot, particularly when we have people who are at the top of their games. Particularly, we're right in the thick of the Olympics. So when somebody from a challenging background medals or makes a team, they say, and they focus this narrative on, look at these challenges, but they still thrived. And that makes me so upset because they don't understand that it's strictly because of that. And because they had to work harder and prove people wrong and wake up earlier and do more with less. What message are you excited to send to all the young women and men who are really being allowed to reframe those expectations and feel empowered in not being down about whatever is handed to them, but saying, hey, this is your superpower that nobody else can mess with? What excites you about that?
So first of all, I love the concept of reframing. And I was thinking a lot in preparation for our conversation today about something that early in my career I felt was a challenge. I felt like I was underestimated and it frustrated me. I walk into a room and I could tell that people didn't think I had anything to add in terms of value, or maybe less value, or that's how I felt, right? And I looked really young. I was, identify as female. And for whatever reason, I felt I was underestimated. I also am an introvert. So I listen and observe before I speak. Interestingly, it has become my ultimate superpower. Reframing has allowed me to say, oh, wait, they're underestimating me. Okay. What can I do with this? And now I'm pretty sure if you ask people who work with me, they want me on their side of a negotiation. I think the other part of that is by listening, I actually feel like we get a lot more insight into the types of concerns we need to address to make systemic changes, which are necessary for a real sustainable transformation. So I think reframe.
Sure.
I 100% agree that it is because of, not in spite of, the things that we've been through that make us the leaders we are today. And channeling that to a superpower will hopefully let everyone succeed.
I agree. I think being an immigrant, I came to the States when I was 8 from Korea, and our parents in their best intent and wanting us to thrive. Like, I wasn't born Jerry, right? We adopted these names and these identities and try to fit in. What can my Korean immigrants tell me about American football? I had to learn that, frankly, because I wanted to fit in, right? And then I think what I'm most excited for, yes, I think there are cultural things that, my children should learn, but I want to empower them to also recognize and truly believe that they are who they are. And there's not a whole lot we can change, and that it's not their fault or their responsibility to be accepted. It is actually the task of the others in the world to accept them for who they are. And so, these things that sometimes I think we look at the statistics, right? And so in the corporate world, we look at, API leaders who aren't advancing as much. And while that is a call for us to do the work, I am excited because we've all been doing the work. We have the talent, and it's just a matter of time until people realize that when I approach a problem, my brain goes into 2 actual different languages. And I look at it from my Korean lens and my American English lens. And why is that not a skill, right? Why is the ability to think of problems in at least 2 different lenses? And my identities are limited to being a straight born East Asian man, right? And so if you have multiple identities and different experiences you can draw from, then that is so powerful. Final question, and you've given us so much throughout this conversation. And I've gotten to know younger Marissa and so hopeful that there are so many young Marissas out there today. But what advice would you give younger version of Marissa, whether it was the 11-year-old at the UN, whether it was the final visit to the pediatrician at 18, or probably one of many moments during law school and the first couple of years of practicing where, you were really going through some challenges? What would you tell younger Marissa?
I wish that I had trusted myself a little bit more. To your point, I think I am who I am because of my experiences, but I definitely had a confidence gap between what I was delivering and how I felt about what I was delivering. And I wish I'd listened a little more to the people who I trusted, who were saying, you've got this, and this actually is really good. They weren't being nice to me. They were my advocates. They wanted me to advance. So when things weren't what they wanted, they were clear about that. So I should have seen that when they were saying things were great, they were in fact great. And somehow it must have processed because I had the confidence to push through. I was trying to think of an articulate way to say this, but I had so many wins along the way that I didn't stop and really reflect on. I said, okay, I graduated college. I was supposed to graduate college. I graduated law school. Okay, that was the task. I got into this law firm. Well, of course I had to get into this law. No, those were each accomplishments that spoke to something of value inside of me that was going to help me in my further career. And I think stopping and looking down the mountain every now and again, really making those milestone moments, and then turning around and looking back up and getting on your way.
That's such great advice. I think we forget all the cool things that we've done. We forget the people who've helped us. We forget because of ambition and because of the things that we are taught and conditioned to think, we don't remember as well as we should all the things that we've done. And as you mentioned, you pursued law because your father said nobody can take a law degree away from you. People also cannot take away facts.
Yes.
People cannot take away historical events. And so today we did this podcast, right? You have this job. You have the impact that you've had. Those are things, and I think particularly for leaders of Asian descent who we are over-taught to be humble. My only encouragement is this. If it happened, it's not bragging.
I love that.
You are telling a piece of factual history that is objective. I won an award. I got promoted. I did something. Shouldn't feel icky because it's bragging. You're just stating a fact. There's a very distinct difference between I was promoted versus I'm the best person in this room. And that's how I think we encourage each other to hype each other up. Rely on the facts. You are the chief sustainability officer of one of the biggest brands in the world. People look up to you. People have learned from you. And you shouldn't shy away from that. I'm not saying that you are, of course not. But it's because those are facts. And then we have to stick to the facts. And then we can build the confidence to make statements to say, I am the best. I am the whatever you want to be. And then you can go to the moon and come back before dinner time, as your father has suggested. Marissa, thank you so much for your time today. It is so good to be in community with you, sharing your life lessons and your life story. I hope that the audience has learned so much as I have in our conversation today. Thanks again to our friends at Ascend for making this conversation a possibility, and keep leading, y'all.
Oh, mahalo.
Thanks for listening to API Futures, presented by Ascend, where we empower global leaders of tomorrow. Subscribe to API Futures on Spotify, Amazon Music, and Apple.